absolute pleasure.
So this brings us to the third part on spiritual awareness, which is something that's been really true to my heart. I did a lot of intuitive searching a few months ago on what topics do I want to explore. And I believe it was Yogananda sort of giving me a hint of that awareness. And so I actually made it my mission in the last several months, like to truly introspect on this idea of not only just awareness, but something higher, spiritual awareness. What is that? It seems so lofty. So what are your thoughts on spiritual awareness?
So this out of your three topics, this comes to the core of the purpose of our birth, as it were, and the purpose of our existence, which is, call it self-realization, you can call it enlightenment, you can call it many things, and many religions do, but it's essentially the same, which is our, the realization of our true selves and our ultimate nature. And anything that takes you to that spiritual, that lofty goal or that meaning is encapsulated in a practice which is spiritual awareness, and that can be on the gross to the most subtle level. If we start with the gross levels, i.e., what can you do with your hands, and what can you do with your mind, and how can you devote those practices and purify those practices for your ultimate purpose. That's the most gross elements, and the most subtle elements would be a very specific technique of meditation that takes you to that state, that pure stillness state, perhaps where you can touch that divine experience within your own consciousness or your own awareness.
And I'm thinking of a quote. I have it somewhere here, but the gist of it is Yogananda says something that you can have self-realization in this lifetime.
In this life, yeah.
And how does that tie to spiritual awareness? For most people, it seems like a stretch. Like, what is self-realization? And how can you have it in one lifetime? Maybe any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I personally, I found it useful just to keep the idea of self-realization as an idea, or enlightenment as an idea that I know about because I've read about it, or Guruji has described it. Yogananda has described this experience, he calls it an experience in cosmic consciousness. It's a chapter in his Autobiography of Yogi, and he's entitled a poem called Samadhi. And it's a very beautiful description of this experience. But it's so those words he asks us to memorize, yeah. But he doesn't ask. Oh, she was getting the words out because she's hopefully working on memorizing them. But he doesn't. Whilst meditating, I think it's better just to keep that idea. For me, it's better just to keep that idea in my consciousness somewhere. But whilst meditating, I'm just focusing on very simple things in spiritual awareness, i.e., stillness, and creating that loving joy within me, and that that speaking to God in the language of my heart and listening for his response. All these very simple concepts. And Yogananda says, if you experience that peace, if you experience that joy as an after effect of meditation, you should consider that's the blessing that God has responded. So I like to focus on being a simple-minded person. I like to focus on the simple things as opposed to the lofty goal that the simple things will get you to.
I agree with you on that one, because I've been practicing most of my life. However, it gets so lofty, like the Samadhi poem, which maybe at the end I'll read off to our viewers. But it's esoteric at best for me. And at the end of the day, I start the day with saying, I am present, whether it's here or with my breath. And I'm going to take simple action every day. And then surrender the results. Because otherwise it just becomes too difficult. This idea of awareness through techniques that will give us ultimate enlightenment.
Yeah, giving the results to God is an important one, isn't it, Jilpa? Because it's not just that, when you give, for example, when you give charity, when you donate, you're giving something physical and tangible, your hard-earned work to a charity or a good cause. So, but if you fail, say you fail in an endeavor, do you give that to God? You have to, don't you? You have to give. You give God both. It's all Maya. We're in the delusive existence right now. So the win or the loss, being even-minded, giving both to God is the ultimate state. So don't be afraid to give your winnings and your losses to God.
And it's all energy. So if that energy was manifested in a way that appears to be at the present moment as a failure, ultimately it was energy that you put into with good intention, and then you surrender that energy.
Yeah, and out of that loss can sometimes come something quite beautiful, can't it?
Yes. And that's where another level of awareness comes in, is understanding synchronicity and timing, and there was a purpose. I think you mentioned that a lot in your podcasts, that what appeared to be not the right path, and later something else reveals itself. That was taking you down another avenue.
Absolutely. I'm just reminded of the butterfly stories. You know how like a caterpillar goes through all that, eats all that junk food, and then goes through that pain, and then the transition of becoming a butterfly. So we lost the gross body of a butterfly and became gross body of a caterpillar, and became more subtle and beautiful in the butterfly form, which is, I think, is a really good analogy for our lives, isn't it? That loss that you may think that is a loss, but actually it could be something. There no doubt will be something far greater on the other side, a rainbow.
It reminds me of, isn't there the Yogananda story where he truly wanted his uncle to help him, and at the time his uncle resisted? Do you recall when he was trying to escape in the train early, when he was still a child? And
I can't recall that one.
I'm
His brother, perhaps?
Maybe it was his brother, but I thought it was his uncle, who normally can be relied on to help him. And at the
yes, but yeah, no. Were you thinking of his brother-in-law, perhaps?
maybe it was you could rely on, but it would turn out to be for the better that he was told no.
Okay.
So one of the few questions we had considered discussing is, what does it mean to be spiritually awake, and how does a soul navigate to a place where they cultivate spiritual awareness? Perhaps you've covered this already, but maybe for people who are still becoming familiar with the spiritual path, what does that mean?
Yogananda's got a very powerful prayer for this concept, and I'll just recite it if you'll allow me. I use this is one of my go-to prayers when I'm leading a service as well. It starts like this: "O blazing light, awaken my heart, awaken my soul, ignite my darkness, tear the veil of silence, and fill my temple with thy glory." And I think in each of those lines, I mean, you could make it very. Yogananda often encouraged us to use affirmations, and affirmations are these like positive thought ideas, and making them, affirming them again and again. And he's got a whole book on, scientific healing affirmations. It's got, maybe 1,000 different affirmations in there. So you can always find something that's very, very relevant to your life at that time. And affirmations is a very, very powerful way. And I think like in, Western science, Western medicine is coming to grips with the positive impact of psychiatry, the positive impact of positive affirmations and confirming and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, going back to your question, cultivating spiritual awareness. You really have to. It's not something that you can force, is it? Your desire for these lofty goals has to really come from within, and it takes like on the first level, it takes a level of like deduction, like with my relationships that I have, with my lifestyle, with the things that I'm filling my time with. What am I doing? What am I achieving? What am I trying? Where am I trying to go? And then you'll go, if you really introspect, you'll see that it's not about that relationship with that person. It's not really about having this fancy car. It's not about all these gross things. It's about something much, much deeper. So you on the first level, you have to really introspect about your whole life and your whole life's purpose, and you can use it whilst you're doing that. You can use like a generic scripture that's universal. So, for example, if you read the Bhagavad Gita, and so Bhagavad Gita is this. It's called Bhagavad Gita, means the song of the soul, which is a very apt name, and it's the most revered scripture in Indian philosophy. And the reason for that is because it's very short. It's very simple, and it's very universal. There's no need for blind belief in any part of that scripture. It's just it speaks to your soul. If you read it, you'll see that it just speaks to the ultimate truth, which is undeniable. It's it was spoken 5,000 years ago, but every single line you'll see is applicable then as it is now. And that interestingly, where does that take place? You wouldn't think it, but there's a whole colossal war going on called the Mahabharata in the wider scripture, between a family, between a set of cousins, as it were. And so there's a whole epic called Mahabharata, and it's very, very long. It's a story within a story within a story. And one of the stories within a story within the story is one of the generals, Arjuna. He's in the middle of the battlefield, and his conscience tells him, oh my God, I can't fight these soldiers. They're my cousins. I know them. They're my own blood, flesh and blood. And Krishna, who is his charioteer, or his guide in his life, says, no, not only you can, but you must. It is your spiritual duty. And Yogananda, interestingly, in his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, says that the whole of the Mahabharata and the whole of the Bhagavad Gita is actually, it's all metaphorical. So who is Arjuna fighting? Who is he trying to kill? Those cousins and those family that's on the other side of the battlefield are all those qualities within himself that he doesn't want to let go of. His ego is so attached to these things that he thinks are there for his ultimate well-being, but actually they're not there. They're the things that are holding you down. And it takes a lot of, on the first level, as I said, introspection. On the second level, will, and the third, faith, and all these other qualities for you to muster up that strength. And we'll go back to that analogy, that story you gave of Brother Ananda and grabbing that snake. All those things are prerequisites for you to muster up the strength to pick up that snake that's that you think is going to kill you, but it's actually within your control, especially if your guru has told you. And Arjuna, Krishna was guiding him. So Krishna was God. So God was guiding Arjuna to fire the arrows, but he dropped his weapons. Can you imagine? So he dropped his physical weapon, but also mentally dropped his mental state. And if you read that scripture, and if you want to read more, that God talks with Arjuna is what Yogananda has, his translation is, and it's the level of depth it goes on to is just mind-blowing.
And what's interesting about the battle is that really, that's the inner battle that all of us are going through. So for those who are thinking, oh, Priyank and Shilpa are talking about these esoteric spiritual concepts, but they're really relevant to the everyday human being, because if you want to cultivate some level of peace, we are all challenged with fighting our demons. And sometimes it's our, what we call the analogy of our brothers and sisters.
Bhishma, one of the persons he has to kill on the other side of the battlefield is Bhishma, and Bhishma is his, I believe, Arjuna's grandfather. Yogananda describes Bhishma as ego consciousness. So he was this great soldier in the Mahabharata, and he was very wise. But he Yogananda said his name and his stature was one of ego consciousness. So Arjuna has to kill the ego consciousness within himself. And interestingly, Bhishma in the story of Mahabharata says that he had a boon that he can determine when he dies. So he can decide when he leaves the body. And so after he was shot, he was still alive. So he was shot with a barrage of arrows by Arjuna and Pandavas, but he was still alive because he had this boon. And Yogananda says that he decides, the ego decides. you decide. The ego is the last thing to go. You have to pluck up that courage to kill that ego, because once you knock out the ego, and then all that's left is your pure soul, diamond nature.
Yeah. And often in the Western society, we are told, I mean, I've been told this when I was much younger and trying to practice things that seemed esoteric to others, that, oh, well, Shilpa, everybody has an ego. Like, if perhaps that ego is the very thing that holds us back at times. So
yeah, I mean, it's useful. Egos are useful, right? If you're playing on the stage to play the different various roles, but you're a fool then if you don't know where the stage ends and where your life begins. If that ego is ruling both the on-stage performances and the off-stage performances, then you're the biggest fool on there. That's why it's dangerous.
That's when it's dangerous. And you mentioned another concept that I feel like it comes back to the same thing I've mentioned a few times, that a lot of this is about trust when we're gaining awareness of who we are. But then what do you do when all this information surfaces up? What do you do when the ego is challenging you that in a way that's hurting you long term? Sometimes even recognizing it is hard. And when we talked about Brother Nandamoy, a lot of that was getting outside of the mind, but also having the trust in the Guru. So maybe you could share a little bit about that, because I have a quote that I think you would appreciate. But when it comes to trusting your Guru, and how does that tie to awareness?
Yeah, well, you can do it yourself without having trust, but how many more lifetimes do you want to take? It's like you want to learn maths. I mean, there are some geniuses out there that can just pick up the pen and paper and just go, right? But most of us, the vast majority of us, rely on the maths teacher. But once the maths teacher's taught you, the first principles, then you can go off on your own. But you can always go back to the maths teacher when you have a problem. And same is true for the Guru. Guru, what does the Guru mean? Guru means dispeller of darkness. Now, it's up to you whether you want to make use of that help. If you don't want to make use of that help and try and do everything, reinvent everything, all of the spiritual process by yourself, then you're free to. But how much longer? And there's no guarantee of the results either. I mean, one of Guruji's famous quotes is I've actually got it on my outside. I've got a meditation room, and one of the I've got a little quote, handwritten quote that I wrote, and in it that says, everything else can wait, but your search for God cannot wait. And then I've then added to it, because I felt that wasn't enough. I've then added it to it, and I've said, know it now or in 1,000 incarnations. Now, these are direct words from Guruji's writings, but they're so potent. And the guru-disciple relationship is potent. I mean, it will take you. Guruji says that you think you're putting all this effort to develop, these spiritual qualities and awareness, but you don't realize how much help is available to you and how much God is doing for you. For example, he said, on this path, 25% is your effort, 25% is the blessings of the Guru, and 50% is the grace of God. So you only have to take care of this 25%, but that 25% you must do. And if you want to make use of the other 25% from the Guru, and God, which is the other 50, so 75% is available to you if you develop this quality of trust and faith and unconditional practice. Doing your practice with faith and without expectation of samadhi bliss on the year one. We live in an instant satisfaction, gratification society, but that is not how the most profound elements of life work. I mean, to become a doctor, how many years of education do you have to go through?
A few things about that. You absolutely nailed the quote that I was going to use. It's from today, January 11th, the Spiritual Diary, and that was the same point about how much effort it takes, and without a guru, the average person, how much longer it takes. There's potent force behind that. And there are times, again, I'm human, I slip. There are times when other priorities seem to nudge at me and tell me, well, do this, or go do this for my son. All these things come up in the morning, and then I'll be like, well, I'll get to it. Next thing I know, days have gone by and I haven't done the practice that I should, the way I need to. But going back to what you said, what Sri Dishwarshi said, like Guruji, or like, your practice comes first. Everything can wait, but search for God cannot wait, because otherwise days will go by and then you will see the results. For myself, too many days go by and then I'm edgier. There's nervousness, there's a little bit of fear, and other parts of your life start breaking down because the energy that is necessary to uplift your soul is being depleted. So yes, and then finally, I think you already covered this, but discuss how our Guru's life purpose was to bring to the West scientific techniques. Now those techniques are, I believe Guruji refers to them as the airplane route.
Yeah.
To help the human gain the ultimate state of awareness.
Absolutely, it is the airplane route. And I mean, before I committed myself to Yogananda as my guru, I did some exploration, as it's important for all people on that venturing on the spiritual path to do. So I ventured out to various different organizations and different techniques, and then I tried them sincerely. Did try the other organizations' methods and techniques, but as soon as I tried Guruji's techniques, I mentioned I'm an engineer, so it's very scientific background, and Yogananda has really foresaw how scientific the humanity was going to become with application of teachings such as religious teachings and spiritual teachings. And I found that Yogananda not only met my heartfelt need for a scientific explanation for the teaching, but actually also far and above exceeded it in terms of how deep it can be. I was thinking of it before I read his works. I didn't think of it in actually that much depth that I thought I did. There was like this, I was just looking at the surface of a pool, and with infinite cave-like depth that Guruji then explains. And he explains the first, in the Autobiography, for example, there's a chapter called The Science of Kriya Yoga, and it's a profound chapter on it's a treatise on the whole of the yoga process and the meaning, and the words themselves are a work of art. How he's put it together, it's just mind-blowing. And it's meant for, he wrote that 100 years ago, but it's meant for today's age. We're in the ascending Dvapara Yuga, which is the age that we're in, and the language that he uses and the techniques are not new. Krishna taught, Yogananda says Krishna taught Arjuna the same technique, and in the Bhagavad Gita, which is the scripture that I mentioned earlier, the technique is in there. So that scripture is that war took place 5,000 years ago, but Guruji says that technique in the lower ages, the Kali Yuga, which is the darker ages, it was lost. And then a few hundred years ago, when we were entering the ascending Dvapara Yuga, the mentality or the consciousness of man was heightened enough to be receptive again to these teachings, and hence the need for Yogananda, Vivekananda, Ramakrishna Paramahansa to bring back these techniques into the consciousness of man. Now it's up to us to make use of their births, and there's 2 or 3 layers that you can apply. So if you go to I know, Shilpa, you're near Encinitas, the meditation center there, but the self-realization fellowship centers around the world. There's one in London, and there's a few in California, for example. But if you go to any of those centers, they may show you an introductory meditation technique such as 20-20-20 breathing, and it's very basic, but it's very, very, very powerful as well. Even that simple one, sometimes I only do that one, and it's beautiful. And then there's the next layer is if you want to scratch beneath that surface, then you become a lesson student, and then there's 2 or 3 higher techniques, the Hum Saw and the Om technique. And then if you go a bit further than that, then that requires you pledging your loyalty and your investing into the guru-disciple relationship. And then the highest technique for the ages is the Kriya technique, and that's what's given after you establish that relationship. And that relationship is important because without remember we talked about the 25-25-50, the ratio. Without you pledging your loyalty and your allegiance, then that 75 can't, even if you did your 25, it won't be available because you haven't gained access to that portal of that 75%, which is why a guru is so important, because it's the portal to that blessing and the guidance and the grace of God. So that all these techniques are just beautifully chiseled for today's age. And Yogananda's, if you read his work, if you read the language and the way he describes the techniques, it's for a scientific temperament such as my own, it exceeds far above and beyond my limited expectations back then.
I recently attended an energy summit, and what was not accessible to me maybe 10 years ago was available in this summit. Is this true knowledge now that we are these here, maybe a physical being. There's so many layers of our bodies, and our energy is shifted based on what we are doing. So these techniques shift the energy. And if those who are aware of the chakras, it helps light up, so to speak, the different layers, which may be subtle energy that not all of us can recognize or feel. But if you are a scientific mind, you realize that you're making a shift. Now, one thing you mentioned in one of your podcasts is the coming ages. What will occur of the state of awareness through these techniques?
Well, I think we already kind of, you get glimpses of it. Like hunches. You have a hunch sometimes, right? And then sometimes you're very confident that your hunch is true, whether it's the way a relationship is going to manifest or how someone's going to react to this, that, the other, or like what is going to transpire, what event is going to come about. All these are very subtle things, like telepathy and things like that. But in the higher ages, these were very common to practitioners of yoga. So as you know, we're in the middle of a Dvapara Yoga and the higher ages. So we're in Dvapara Yoga. We started getting in touch with atomic energies. So like, 80 years ago, we developed the atomic bomb, and we have nuclear energy, a pool of, and now we have nuclear fusion. So like we're fusing atoms now, and apparently from there we can if there was a breakthrough just recently where they got out more energy than they put in, and if that happens, it's this potentially infinite pool of energy that we can have. So we're mastering our ability to manipulate energy in this Dvapara Yoga, and in the ascending, so we're ascending, so it descends and ascends, so we're in the ascending phase. So then after that, there's a Treta Yuga, where like things like telepathy and things like that, and control over the mind and force will be much more prevalent. And then the highest stage is the Satya Yuga, where there'll be very minimal suffering. Everyone will be very conscious, and there'll be much more love. And that's the highest stage that you can live in. The cycles Sri Yukteswar describes in the book called The Holy Science, which you can read. It's a fascinating read if you're into that.
Absolutely. I wish we were in Satya Yuga now. But there's probably some souls that are already on that vibrational level, here for a purpose, because it takes a while to generate that momentum.
Absolutely.
So speaking of awareness, it starts small. As you said, we're in ascending age. What came to mind was that the generation of the future, like my son, I've got him started on Hang Sa and the techniques, and he just thinks it's commonplace. And I'm hoping that more children are part of that, I would say, environment.
Yeah. It's certainly a better time to be born now, wouldn't you say, in terms of spiritual openness and also what's available. Just very simply, in terms, like for example, when you and I, Shilpa, started doing lessons, there are these old manuscript typewritten lessons, typewriter, very old. The structure was very archaic, and you have to work hard to extract those fruits. You have to study hard. But now, like, there's a new format of lessons. There's a phone, there's the lessons on the phone, there's supplementary videos. Like there's this technique that we do called energization, which is about directing the prana, or the life energies, from the cosmic source to the medulla, through the spiritual eye, and then up through to all the body parts, and regenerating your energies. There's that, and life and physiology. There's that technique, and in the lessons it's described, and you do it every day. It takes 15 minutes before your meditation practice. And Guruji says it's better even than asanas, better even than hatha yoga, because you're working with the energy directly to heal and energize a weakened part. But now we have the lessons app, and we have animations, and we have videos, and people talk about, we've got access to all this wealth of material online. And Shilpa, I know you live you live a bit further from the center, but there's people that live nowhere near a center to meditate in a group. But now we have these online meditations that people can be part of, which are a very valuable resource, because not everyone likes to meditate alone in a room by themselves. They like the fellowship element.
Also, our convocation, which is an annual gathering that's been occurring for, I forget how many years, 50, 60.
Yep.
It's been occurring online now just because of COVID, but it's brought me more value than it had, because I live in Encinitas, which is further away from LA. And as a mother, it didn't feel too right to drive that far. But now I attend more services online. And I live close by to Encinitas, which tying back to awareness, to Yogananda, this entire town that I live in is saturated with yoga and meditation. Every direction you go, there's probably a picture of Yogananda. And I believe even Ravi Shankar lived here, and one of the Beatles lived here. Then it just, what do you call it? Environment vibration has been lifted by his presence.
Well, he spent a lot of time there, right, working on his writings and his monumental works, literary works.
Absolutely.
So his energy is steeped in those places, no doubt.
Absolutely. Well, this was wonderful. Any parting words as we close on this topic of spiritual awareness?
Yeah, it was very, very beautiful. Thank you so much for inviting me, Shilpa. I was unsure of what I would talk about, but hopefully I've certainly benefited from your line of probing, questioning, Shilpa.
I hope I haven't exhausted you, since you're in London and you're probably ready for bed.
No exhaustion here. We have pools of infinite energy available to us, especially for talking about the teachings and the life lessons and the benefits that the grace of our Guru Yogananda has given us. So we could talk all night, I'm sure.
I could. Well, I hope I can have you back in a future episode. But we covered 3 beautiful areas. It'll be a 3-part podcast. And thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.